I understand you have to balance out both parts of society. And how you balance that, I know has to be a challenge. But at the same time, if you're giving me the opportunity to return to society, how about giving me all the tools to succeed? I served 23 years. I went in as a juvenile and basically had to grow up and mature in prison, which is not the most ideal spot to mature or even get an education because neither of those things are definite. So I used to see these guys, they used to walk around the prison. We're in maximum security prisons and they had these t-shirts with hearts and hands on them. And I thought these guys were pretty brave. And I saw, okay, wow, that's some serious work. And I felt above all, there was a redemptive quality to it. And I wanted to see, how can I redeem myself, at least personally, in some ways, spiritually. I ended up loving it. There's only 2 states in the United States that actually certifies prisoners as certified nursing assistant. That's California and Connecticut. And, I was able to get that privilege. And I like doing it, I enjoy doing it, and I'm like, wow, I can actually go home and get paid for this, hopefully. And I said, yeah, I think I want to stay in this field, become a nurse, specialize in oncology, because I had a special connection with people who were dying from cancer in there. Obviously, with any professional license, you have to have the educational background for that. So when you go to put your application in, which I did probably with 4 different schools, there's a box in there that says, have you had a conviction? In so many words, basically think twice about moving forward because you're probably not going to qualify even in the application level. The nursing board approving me to get a license is unlikely. So in their assessment, they're like, we rather reserve that spot for somebody who qualifies and we know who's going to have a great opportunity of getting a license than somebody who's going to be unlikely, the whole process. I was hoping there can be some waiver and say, hey, I'll take the chance, I'll spend the money, but none of them, wanted to be able to work with me on that, at least at the moment. But the most important thing in healthcare is being able to take care of somebody. And nobody does the work as much as the nursing assistants. Nurses get a lot of credit, but I hate to say, way at the bottom, we're the ones who do everything. Clean them, bathe them, care for them, talk to them, comfort them. The list goes on. And I think if you're able to do those things for as long as I've been able to do them, I would want you to give me the opportunity because that says it all. And I think that's really what it comes down to, especially when you have somebody who wants to succeed and wants to contribute to society and actually show you that they're really fully in on redeeming themselves every single day. To me, there's no point where I say, okay, I've completely redeemed myself. It's the rest of my life. And to be able to do that, to have that access to a higher income, it's gonna matter. And that's gonna be through professional licensing.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Justice Briefing Live event. The Council State Government's Justice Center is a national, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We represent state officials in all 3 branches of government and in all 50 states. We strive to uphold justice, offer second chances, and ensure safe and healthy communities. My name is Dr. Nicole Jarrett, and I lead the Corrections and Reentry Division at the CSG Justice Center. First, some quick housekeeping items before we dive in. We encourage you to join today's discussion with comments or questions. You can do this in 2 ways: on social media using the hashtag JusticeBriefingLive, or in the Vimeo comments box below the broadcast. Our team is standing by ready to respond. A recording of a transcript of today's event will be made available at csgjusticecenter.org in the coming days. Now, with that out of the way, I'm delighted to welcome all of you here, folks tuning in from across the US, as we mark the launch of our Fair Chance Licensing Project, which provides unprecedented analysis of fair chance licensing practices across all 50 states, which is available today on our website at csgjusticecenter.org. There you can view national trends and also see current practices in your state. And we are grateful to Arnold Ventures, who supported the work. As states struggle with worker shortages, one potential solution is clear: allow more people to pursue occupations and professions that require a license, such as cosmetology, land surveying, and many others. Nearly 1 in 4 jobs require a government-issued license, yet many people with court records are prohibited from receiving these licenses or are discouraged from seeking jobs in licensed fields. Allowing qualified people with juvenile and criminal records to access these licenses will increase the number of skilled people with appropriate industry credentials who are ready to work. Excluding people with criminal and juvenile records from jobs can have devastating effects on their future, limit the talent pool for employers, and slow economic growth. According to the U.S. Chambers of Commerce, currently half as many workers are available for every open job as there were on average over the past 20 years. And chambers of commerce across the country report that worker shortages are limiting economic recovery and growth. Yet many states have policies and regulations that are locking out qualified workers from businesses that are desperate to fill vacancies. Although the purpose of licensing is to ensure that all newcomers to a profession meet a standardized set of relevant qualifications, adding licensing requirements to specifically restrict people with records from occupations, regardless of their ability to demonstrate the qualifications necessary, only serve to lock out qualified workers from consideration by employers who struggle to hire. The good news is, states are beginning to recognize that policies that exclude qualified workers from the talent pool are limiting economic recovery. In 2021 alone, 9 states and DC passed significant fair chance legislative reforms to remove these barriers. Fair chance licensing laws seek to remove barriers to occupational licenses for people with criminal records to give them a fair chance to get the credentials they are otherwise qualified to receive. The CSG Justice Center has identified 14 best practices that support fair chance licensing. These include creating detailed standards to ensure that all applicants are fairly considered in the full context of their past and current circumstances, and allowing workers to find out whether their criminal history will result in the denial of a license before investing time and money in pursuing necessary education and training. The project also provides resources for lawmakers, business leaders, workforce organizations, and community advocates to explore how fair chance licensing can help address the nation's current worker shortage. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by 2 of my colleagues who led the licensing project. Josh Gaines, who's a project manager as part of our economic mobility team, will walk you through our web tool and maps. And Chidi Umes Raleigh, Deputy Program Director in our economic mobility portfolio, will dive deeper into the challenges of current licensing practices. And with that, Chidi, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Nicole. And so as Nicole said, a lot of the work that we did for the licensing project was really looking at the barriers to work through licensure that people with criminal records face. And so I want to just do a little level setting of some of the trends that we're seeing across the country on how these barriers to work really operate. First slide. So as we look at all the licensing barriers, we found that 13,000 provisions in state law, according to the National Inventory of Collateral Consequences of Conviction, impose these conviction-based barriers to occupational licensing and professional licensure. Of these 13,000, 1/3 are actually mandatory and must be imposed on a person convicted of a disqualifying crime. And when we say must be imposed, that really ties the hands of those who are the licensing entities and the licensing bodies from being able to use their discretion in determining whether or not a person's particular crime will be disqualifying from that conviction. So 3/4 of these 13,000 barriers persist indefinitely, and a person with a potentially disqualifying conviction will generally be subject to them for their life. And so no matter when the crime was committed, no matter what the term of rehabilitation, no matter what other penalties that the person has gone through, a provision that lasts indefinitely will stay with them no matter what job opportunity or licensure opportunity that they seek, absent the fact that they get, unless they are able to get an expungement or some other record release, such as sealing or expungement from their state. Next slide. And so as we look at these mandatory consequences and some of those that last indefinitely, although we know that those do present the most onerous obstacle for work, their discretionary counterparts often can be as prohibitive as well. And so even though some of these statutes can allow for the licensing entity to have discretion as to how they assess a person with a criminal conviction, if there isn't enough guidance or information in how this discretion is exercised, that can also pose a barrier for people with criminal records who are applicants for the license. And so in this example we have here, we see that a lot of times in a lot of states across the country, a criminal history is not considered until a person has actually invested their time and years of training and sometimes thousands of dollars, only to not know whether or not their particular criminal conviction will be a bar to licensure. And so this is some of the best practices and some of the things that we talk to states about are trying to figure out ways to provide more information to applicants prior to their investments to figure out whether or not their particular conviction will be a bar to the licensure that they seek. And so as part of the project, a part of the licensing project, we thought it was important to share some of these personal stories of people who have lived experiences in these challenges associated with obtaining a license after a criminal conviction. We also wanted to hear from legislators who was at the forefront of reducing licensing barriers in their state. And so to that, we were able to interview a man named Lester Young, who is from South Carolina, in his pursuit of becoming a home inspector. And so at this time, we will watch a video of Lester Young as he tells his story.
I grew up in Hilton Head Island in South Carolina. My family, my mother, my father, all my immediate relatives are there. So I grew up majority of my life in Hilton Head, South Carolina, at the age until about 19 years old when I was sent to prison. When I was sent to prison for 22 years inside of the prison system, I got out of the system and decided to move to Columbia, South Carolina. So I've been staying in Columbia now for a total of 7 years. When I walked out of prison, my mentor encouraged me to write out my 5-year plan upon my re-entry. And one of those plans, my first 2 years, was owning my own home. You know, that was one of my top goals in my 2 year after being released from prison, which I did. I got a job with a company here in Columbia that allowed me to excel, got promoted within the 90 days and just kept pushing. I found the house that I wanted that I'm staying in to this day. And part of the house, it was a guy I had to do home inspection. He walked in, he did an inspection, within an hour he was out. And I cut him a check for $500. And I was like, bruh, so he told me what I needed to do to become a home inspector. I immediately, the next day, I went to the place where he told me. I signed up, paid them almost $1,000 to become a home inspector to take their classes. I completed the class, successfully passed the class. Now I'm excited. I'm like, oh, I'm going to start my own business, because that was in my 5-year plan, becoming an entrepreneur, starting my own business. So I went there and I got discouraged, and the fight was knocked out of me when I passed the woman my ID and my money for the exam, and she told me that I could not take the exam. And I was like, why? She said, because you have a felony conviction. You cannot take the state board exam. You would have to go in front of another board to get approved for this. And I was like, I just paid $1,000, spent hours and hours and weeks in this class, and no one told me. I asked this beforehand, and they was like, well, in order to get state approved, you have to go in front of a board because you have a felony. Right now, we're gonna deny you to take the test. And it was extremely frustrating. I invested money, time into this, studying long days to pass this exam, and they told me I couldn't do it. So it was very frustrating. I think the Senate Bill 295, I believe it's a very important bill. Why? Because as a formerly incarcerated person, I know what it felt like to feel almost discriminated against because I had a felony conviction, where I saw an opportunity for me to become a home inspector that would allow me to earn extra income and become my own boss, to run my own business that would give me the freedom to be able to do things differently in the society, be a part of my rehabilitation, part of my redemption, but also will be an example to show other people, other individuals who have felony convictions, that you can actually start a business after incarceration. So if we pass a bill affording individuals an opportunity to gain gainful employment through occupational licensing, guess what happens? You affected that one person, that family now has extra income, the community now has economic stability now because they have more income flowing in the community, and guess what? We have a safer society. I use this analogy of thinking about dropping a rock in a pond or a bottle of water, and you'll see that the waves is a ripple effect. So lawmakers, that would be the first thing, is sit down with those who are impacted by the policies, sit down and talk to them. And then from there, like, really create laws that are really focused on not punitive, but focused on redemptive qualities. How could we help people change, and how could we create a safer society? And that's where we focus on writing these different policies.
We would like to thank Lester Young for sharing his story with us. It's such a powerful story it is. We also would like to thank Nick Aponte from Connecticut, a young man who is in pursuit of his licensure in nursing after spending years as a nursing assistant. We also want to thank State Representative Kyle Kaler from Ohio, who was so gracious enough to share his time and to help us amplify this issue as he talks about his work in Ohio. And so you can find those videos on the website, and we encourage everyone to go and watch those powerful stories. And so at this time, I'll turn it to my colleague Josh Ames to talk more about some of the best practices that states are using to address barriers to licensure for people with criminal records.
Thanks so much, Chidi. What I'd like to do, as Chidi mentioned, is sort of walk through our new home for fair chance licensing that we've created on the web, and walk you through a tool that we have created that was mentioned earlier about how states are implementing these best practices, what these best practices look like across the country, and sort of give you an overview of some of the I guess, more high priority, high impact things that states are doing in this area. So I'd like to show you our site. And there we have it. This is our new home for fair chance licensing. And as Chidi mentioned, there are numerous resources and informational videos and content here, including that story about Lester Young, Nick Aponte. And you can also learn about, about Representative Kaler in Ohio, who led the march in Ohio in recent legislative sessions to create what is really one of the most robust fair chance licensing laws in the country. And Chidi talked a little bit about how it is that these problems arise when we talk about licensing, barriers themselves, people not being able to get the license, and then people not knowing whether they can get the license and being shut out or self-selecting themselves out as a result of that. Well, to deal with these sorts of things, over half of the states have enacted broadly applicable fair chance licensing laws in one form or another. And these recent reforms are really based on three key principles. One is that licensing bodies should have the authority to deny applicants with past convictions that directly relate to the tasks and duties of a licensed activity, such that licensure would create a real risk to public safety. The second is that workers should not be barred from licensure solely on the basis of a past conviction. Instead, they should be given individualized consideration that accounts for their past and current circumstances and the unique nature of their criminal conduct. And finally, licensing policies and practices involving determinations about criminal history should be transparent and should be consistently applied. So we looked at all of the fair chance licensing laws that have been implemented in those states I mentioned. And we developed this tool that I'm going to go to now, and the link will be put in the chat there for you to access and review on your own. And we came up with this 50-state overview of the 14 ways that states are taking action in this area. And I want to walk you through some of these. First, I just want to say kind of where this information came from. So it was gathered by us from a statutory analysis of the fair chance licensing laws of each state. And I want to stress that only laws that impose uniform requirements for all or most occupational and professional licenses were considered. So these are broadly applicable licensing laws that affect, licensure across the board, not some narrow provisions that affect, one or two licenses. The 14 strategies that I'm about to talk through were identified by comparing common features of state fair chance licensing laws. So states identified, as you'll see, as having fully implemented a strategy have enacted policies that fit right within the definition of the strategy that we're talking about. And those that are partially implemented have enacted some part of the strategy, but not all of it. And what I'm about to show here is current through the previous legislative session for the most part. Now, many of the best practices that are here are really easy to implement, common sense approaches that are broadly effective at removing unnecessary barriers to jobs in licensed areas. One of the most innovative, and this has been implemented in 21 states, and you can see it visualized here on the screen, creates a statutory process whereby workers with criminal histories who are interested in pursuing work in a licensed field can petition a licensing board for a decision about whether their criminal history will be disqualifying before investing the time and money into apprenticeship or other education or training, as Lester Young did, that is necessary for licensure. The effect of this simple solution is to dramatically reduce the deterrent effect of discretionary licensing barriers. It takes that risk that a person faces when they don't know if all of their work will be rewarded when it's actually time for their criminal history can be considered, and largely eliminates it, allowing people to plan their career pathways with confidence that their work is going to pay off. Now, as you can see, we've got this here under our before applying heading, and I just want to talk a little bit about how these maps are organized. When thinking about these best practices, we identified three large buckets that each one fell fairly neatly within. So the first is before applying. And this is where this pre-application decision process that I just talked about is. And this is largely about ensuring that prospective workers have adequate information to identify and plan these career pathways. The second bucket is consideration of criminal history. And this is really about defining whether and how criminal history can be considered. And the third, procedural protections. And these are all about ensuring that fair chance licensing standards are adhered to by decision makers and that applicants are able to access avenues for reconsideration of their criminal history when that's appropriate. Now, I want to move away from the first bucket that we were talking about and get into this consideration of criminal history a little bit, because as important as when criminal history is considered is how it is considered. Now, rather than giving licensing boards nearly unfettered discretion to disqualify workers with criminal histories, most states in the country have created clear statutory standards that help to ensure that applicants with convictions are treated fairly, consistently, and individually. And kind of the first sub area we come to here are limitations on types of convictions that can be considered, or I should say dispositions, since they're not all necessarily convictions. The first one here is non-conviction records. We see that 16 states have now put a explicit prohibition on place that says that arrests that are not followed by conviction cannot be considered by licensing authorities. Makes sense since they're not probative of a person's guilt. We can see here that 7 states have explicitly prohibited juvenile adjudications from being considered by licensing authorities. And this recognizes a key concept behind creating a separate justice system for juveniles. There are obviously developmental differences between children and adults that mean the kids shouldn't be saddled with long-term legal consequences. And these provisions also explicitly enshrine broader state policies that prohibit juvenile records from being used to impose any sort of barriers, not just barriers to licensing under law. We can also see that 25 states have fully implemented a provision that takes pardons and sealed and expunged records and convictions off the table for licensing boards to consider. Again, something that makes sense since the purpose of these mechanisms is to allow people to move forward and pass their conviction, really with a focus on economic growth and mobility in many states. And I do just want to note here that when we're talking about, getting rid of these non-conviction dispositions, I guess you could call them here, it's the fact that we're talking in terms of explicit bars on considering these is significant, because we want people like Lester Young, others who are working, who are not yet licensed but would like to be, or are considering jobs in licensed field, to know very clearly the extent to which certain criminal history of theirs will be considered. A different kind of limitation is just limiting consideration of lower level offenses, often nonviolent misdemeanors. You can see that 9 states have now implemented these. Many states have determined that certain lower level offenses will never pose a risk to public safety in the context of licensed work. And so they've just said that you can't consider them. This eliminates the need for licensing boards also to evaluate convictions that would never be cause for concern. And similarly, a number of states have said that older convictions should not be considered by licensing bodies. You can see here, and there are now 11 states that have fully implemented a ban on the consideration of older convictions. 8 have created some sort of partial limitation on the consideration of those. This is where a limitation would apply for only certain types of crimes often. And this reflects data that suggests that the risk of reoffense drops dramatically for most people after just a few years without any sort of criminal justice involvement. And it ensures that people can't be considered once they've remained conviction-free during that time. And usually the time range on the limits of consideration are about 3 to 10 years in most of these states. Now I'd like to look at the standards. So we sort of talked about what states are taking off the table as far as what licensing bodies cannot look at all. But when you can look at convictions, and in many instances it makes sense to, states have recognized that there needs to be some guidance about how those convictions are considered. And that's what we put here in this standards portion. And the real hallmark and sort of touchstone of licensing practice, fair chance licensing best practices, is individualized consideration. And there are 28 states now that have required that applicants for licensure be considered as individuals, right? You can't simply look at a person's criminal record and say, based on the offense they were convicted of, that they cannot receive a license. You have to look at the person in the context of their experience, and you have to look at the crime in the context of that conduct that led to the conviction. So in addition to ensuring that no offense is automatically disqualifying, the standards that are in place are really important because it gives everybody, applicants for licensure, licensing regulators and licensing bodies, it puts them all on the same page as far as what's going to be considered. And it allows people to put forth evidence about why they should be licensed that goes directly to the concerns that the licensing board should have. And these concerns usually are listed in law, and they require the licensing body to consider, for example, the nature and seriousness of the offense, the age of the conviction, the age of the person when the offense was committed, and the nature of the specific duties and responsibilities for which licensure is required. Evidence of rehabilitation and other mitigating circumstances, of course, is really important to be considered as well. And then this final bucket is procedural protections. And these are all really things designed to make the process work better, to make the standards work better, to ensure accountability from licensing boards, to ensure transparency for the benefit of people applying for licensure. And as with many of these best practices, a lot of these are very simple, sort of common sense things that can have a very significant impact. 9 states, for example, have fully implemented a provision of law which requires licensing bodies to explain in writing why they consider a conviction disqualifying if they're going to deny you based on that conviction, which makes good sense. They take it a step further, though, these 9, and actually require the licensing board to address each of these factors that they're required to consider under law, such as the nature and history, the nature and seriousness of the offense, the age of the offense, these sorts of things that we talked about earlier, and make findings for each of those so that if there is a need to challenge the decision, there's a record upon which to base that challenge. But also, more importantly, it creates a soft enforcement mechanism. The licensing body has to follow the law regarding what they can consider in order to address those considerations in writing when issuing a denial. And I know we talk to get questions from policymakers that we work with on this quite often about, how do we make sure this works? And this is one really simple, easy way to do it that increases transparency across the process as well. Finally, and this is another fairly simple best practice that can go a long way, is 13 states have fully implemented a provision that requires licensing bodies to provide applicants who are denied based on criminal conviction some information about their rights. Can they appeal? Can they reapply? Can they submit additional information about their rehabilitation or other relevant facts that the licensing board can reconsider either now or at some point in the future? And as with many of these, it's not really about, whether people are actually being denied or not. It's about arming people going into the process with the information that they need to fully navigate what otherwise would be somewhat of a black box that most people don't have any experience dealing with, particularly when it comes to their criminal convictions. There's a lot more on here. Obviously, we don't have time to go through all 14 of these, but as I mentioned, the link there will be in the chat. I encourage everybody, if you're interested in some more of this, to take a look. Many more resources are available on this site, including links to some other third-party sites that have similar information. If you have any questions about any of this, we look forward to talking to you about it. Thank you for joining us, and I will hand it back to Nicole.
Great. Thank you so much, Chidi and Josh, for walking us through these resources. It's a lot of information, but I think the way it's broken down is really easy to really understand where states are at. And I really want to thank all of you for joining the conversation today. We encourage you to continue the discussion in your organizations and states using the videos and website maps. We will be also providing additional tools and materials to raise awareness and promote discussion about barriers to work with people with records. So we encourage you to visit the Fair Chance Licensing Project page for future updates. Thank you.
Well, our family business is a manufacturing facility located in Springfield. We've been in business for almost 50 years now, and it's a quintessential family business in the fact that it is 6 brothers and sisters working together with our 20 employees. Our 20 employees are like family to us. So when I look at this bill about employing people in the state of Ohio who have convictions, I think of the people that work for us and the fact that they indeed are part of our family. And that is the way I think a lot of employees see their jobs. Well, the Fresh Start Act does 2 simple things. The first thing it does is it starts to track what occupations are being denied to individuals in the first 5 years after their conviction or release from prison. That's very important because a lot of us don't know what jobs are being denied these individuals who are trying to start out. Occupational license. That's important because these individuals are not just out of prison recently, they are out of prison for 5 years or 5 years away from, and they have shown that they are being responsible and being able to hold a job here in the state of Ohio. The reason we picked the 5-year look back was very important because studies show us that if an individual goes 5 years without committing a crime, they're no more likely to commit another crime than you or I. That is the time limit we set because studies show us that's what we needed to do. I want to hear stories of people who are moving from prison or conviction into independence. I think when I talk to people in my district and I hear stories, I'll give you an example. One of the best examples I had in this passing this bill was an individual who was in college, was outside a fraternity house, was 20 years old. They were starting a bonfire. It was obviously a wrong thing to do, but when the police were called and the fire department individuals, this one individual stood there. He now has a conviction for arson. They were doing something stupid. He's now 40 years old. He has 3 children. This is somebody that made a mistake when they were young and is now could be penalized if he needed an occupational license today. This is what this bill was written for, so that people who made foolish mistakes when they were young and now they're 40 can move out in life and take care of their families. I think one of the main things we do as state legislators are make sure that people have the jobs they need. This is a bill that does specifically that. If 20% of the jobs in any state require an occupational license, this is what we have to do to move people from government dependency to something new. There's nothing more important than the fact that a person is able to get a job and provide for themselves. I think some people call it the gospel of work, and the fact that we need to be preaching that there's one important thing that can change a person's life, and that's a job. We saw a number of groups on the left and the right that came together as allies for this bill, whether it was a Buckeye Institute, Foundations for Good Government, Policy Matters, Americans for Prosperity. Those are folks from the far left and the far right that came together and saw the value that this bill had. The Fresh Start Act was important to everybody involved. You just don't get out of prison or turn your life around and apply. Many of these folks are working many long hours to do training so that they can have a job. Some of those, like a cosmetologist, your basic hairdresser, they have to go through 1,500 hours of training just to be able to get that license. You know what? When you ask what happened to those individuals who got denied, we don't know. Because up to this point, until we passed House Bill 263, no one kept track of that. And now this bill will definitely do that and show us where we need to tweak the bill in the future. If there are individuals that are still suffering because of licensing boards denying them the ability to move into an occupation like hairdressing or landscaping, this bill will tell us now where we need to change things. So that's why I'm excited about the bill as we move to the future, because it'll tell us how effective this change means to Ohioans.